Welcome to the Earthworks Podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Welcome to another Earthworks Podcast. I'm Joel Simmons, and today I have a very special guest that I'm very nervous about because Tom Breiner was the superintendent at Fiddlers Elbow when I was a wee lad in this business. And I quite honestly, Tom, say to most people that I learned probably most things from you. Tom has been a dear friend, a mentor, and basically, I mean, literally, Tom, I think the first time I was ever on a golf course was at your place. I could
tell.
Yes, I knew that. I think you showed me what a ball washer was. I tell that story often. There are so many stories in my career that I tell at academies or when I was teaching at Rutgers and you were teaching at Rutgers. But many of my stories early on were Tom Breiner stories, and they just seem to never end.
That's because I was your only customer.
You were for the very longest time. I think at one point my accountant said, you know, he's your only customer. You've got to do everything you can. And I wasn't sure exactly what he was implying, but I was hoping it wasn't what I thought it was. And it wasn't, thank goodness. But at any rate, literally, I think the first time I got out there, you would show me, this is a fairway, this is a green. And I'm not sure I'd ever played golf before or had ever been on a golf course. And that's how bad. This is what year, 1990? I think
so. I was trying to figure out if it was 89 or 90, but it was somewhere in there.
Early on. So when did you get to Fiddler's Elbow?
1986. I had spent 15 years at Oak Hill in Hunterdon County, Oak Hill Golf
in New Jersey. Yep.
Yes.
And then Fiddler's Elbow at that time had two 18s, and had they already started, or they were already in the works for the Forest Course when you got there?
When you started working with us, we had just completed. It was 27 originally. Then we put 9 holes in that I think opened in 88. And then the Forest Course was built it opened in 1994.
Right.
So that's a little bit of the history.
And that course was a Reese Jones design. We'll talk a little bit about that because I got some great stories on some of that experience. So let me, I mean, we talked yesterday and we went back and forth on so many stories. And one of the things that, is so important to us. I mean, we interviewed Glenn Smickley, who you know well. And I interviewed John Chassard, who you knew well. And the three of you were really the triad that built Earthworks and my career, quite honestly. And by far, you were the most influential personally in my career. And again, I can't tell you how grateful I am for your friendship, but most importantly, for you patting me on the head and saying, no, that's a fairway. And it goes in that direction, not this direction. Oh, okay. I understand now. But I tell this story often, and you'll know it as soon as I tell it. And I tell it at academies. I've told it at probably every classroom I've ever spoken in. But one of my first experiences with our first product, which was 545, and as you recall, back in the day, 545 was a bag of dust. And if you remember our dear friend Rich Kroc, who is now working for Store Tractor, Rick used to have to spread it. And I remember him coming to me at a trade show once, and as I was talking to some clients, and he walks by casually and says, oh, don't listen to anything. He says, I'm suing him for chicken shit-adosis, excuse my French, because it was literally covered up to here in dust from spreading this stuff. But my story is, and I tell it often, so I know it well. I mean, we're young. I'm a young kid. I'm kind of following Jerry Brunetti, my mentor and our friend, who is unfortunately no longer with us. Yeah. But I'm not really sure. You know, we've got these products. We're working on a golf course. You spread 545 for the first time, and it was one of the fairways. And all I remember, this is my story, and it might be different. All I remember is you called me up and you say, hey, you got to get over here and see this. And then you basically hang up. And I'm like, oh my God, Well, I'm thinking, all right, it's a 20-minute drive from where our office was in Martins Creek, which was close to your home.
That's where I was
And
living, yeah.
And I'm driving 20 minutes to your property, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there's dead birds, there's a hole in the ground. We've got a fire working. It's the middle of July, and we get out there, and you get me in the car. You got to see this. You got to see this. And we drive across the property, and I'm like, I get there and finally, oh, thank God there's no fire. I don't see any dead people. I don't see an ambulance. And I'm looking and I'm like, of course, I don't really know what I'm looking at because I've been in this business for, 15 minutes, it felt like. And you go, look at this, look at this. And I'm like, yeah, what? He goes, it's the only fairway that's standing tall and it's not purpling and it's 95 degrees in the middle of July. And I'm like, is that good? And you're finally kind of letting me off the hook. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, it was really amazing what happened there. That was a shale ridge on top of a hill. And that was one application, I want to say somewhere around a ton to the acre. And Rick Kroc, I think, brags that he was the first person to ever spread it on a golf course.
I'm not sure it's true, but it's a good story.
Yeah, it's close enough. Yeah. But what we saw was that area traditionally was a wilt hotspot, massive.
Yeah. Because
the ground heated up underneath it. And it was remarkable. We made that application, I want to say, in very late June or early July. I mean, we did it in the heat of the summer.
It was warm. I remember that.
But it was, really got our interest, no doubt.
Yeah, well, biological soil management, it's funny. Started putting some moisture content in there. So the story continues, of course. So I'm petrified. I'm thinking this whole investment that I made in this silly little company that I was starting. And I think you knew, and we were just talking about this, when we started Earthworks, our intent was to be in the lawn care business. Yeah. We found you accidentally through a mutual friend, one of the DeFebo boys who was our landlord at our office, who runs a company called R&R Lawn Care. And there was a mutual, I don't even know how you knew them, through church or something.
Yeah.
And one of the guys came to us and said, hey, you should call this guy. And at the time you were still an assistant. You were still working under Eric Case, correct?
That's correct.
So, but you were in charge of this area. So you again, you had just started working with us, and we kind of convinced you to put this application down. And I didn't know what to expect. But I'm driving over there thinking the very worst possible things that could happen. Yeah. And I'd basically given up a big paying job and a career, and I'd invested every dime. I'm living on unemployment. I mean,
car. Your car had 300,000 miles.
Oh yeah, it was old and beat up. I mean, it wasn't my finest time. No. And I'm thinking, oh, great. This is all over for me, because all I know is Tom Breiner says, you got to get over here now. I'm thinking, oh, great. So we get over there, and of course I'm thinking, all right, I'm gonna have to work at the mall selling shoes, or whatever. And I get there, and I'm now driving home, and I'm thinking, oh wow, this is pretty good. I'm getting a little cocky. I'm thinking, oh, we're gonna go off to the moon. We're gonna make $1 billion overnight. So we went up to your neighbor and our old friend Tim McAvoy, who unfortunately we've lost, at Fox Hollow, right next door. And I loved Tim. I mean, and Tim was a stoic gentleman, very conservative. I didn't know him all that well. You referred him to me, and we did the exact same thing. And I'm now, so I call him up in a couple of weeks thinking I'm going to hear this great story. And Timmy says, I didn't see anything. And I'm like, what? How did that happen? So we're back to, I'm sorry, I'm getting excited. We're back to this whole thing of, how could this be? This was what started, Jerry and I sat down at that point. Tim was literally on the same shale line that
he was.
Fiddlers.
Yeah.
And so
heavy clay.
Heavy clay, bad calcium, we'll talk about that in a second, because you got a lot of that story. But bad calcium magnesium ratios, a lot of magnesium, not a lot of calcium, and nothing happened. I mean, the application showed us nothing. So, I'm now back to, I'm working at the mall, and I just lost my, my career. And so Jerry and I started talking, and his first thought was, well, let's go take some soil tests. And we hadn't really started that process yet. we took tests on your fairway, and then we went up to Timmy's, and his was much worse. I don't have the test anymore, unfortunately, but the detail that I remember was you had bad calcium magnesium ratios. He had extremely bad calcium magnesium ratios.
Correct.
So we started going backwards and started looking at getting the chemistry balanced and making all that work. And in fact, Timmy became an incredibly loyal client and loved putting down, a dormant app of 545 every year and really changed a lot of his things. So one of my other, there's so many good stories, Tom,
Yeah.
but one of my other favorite stories is when you guys were building the forest. And I remember, and again, all of these were my first experiences, so they're so ingrained in my mind. But I remember when Eric was up there and we're walking those areas and it's mud. And the mud was literally this thick on my shoes.
Yes.
And it was sticky and messy.
It was amazing.
And we had run soil tests, and the calcium magnesium ratio was way off. It was calling for 3 tons, if I think,
at least, yeah.
of limestone. It was miserably sticky and hard. And I don't think you know the story better than I do. I'm not sure we were able to convince Eric to get lime in there.
No, we didn't do any pre-plant. We did not.
Yeah, this was early on. We the only thing I was really trying to promote at that point was just get some limestone in there before you put down any grass. And
by that time, Joel, we had put 1.5 tons per acre on the established golf course on the other 36. We did it in the dead of winter with guys out of Lancaster came with big trucks that they used for farm fields. I remember that. Yeah. They had conveyor booms on them.
Yeah.
We marked all the irrigation and we drove around with these gigantic trucks on frozen ground. It was remarkable, the results.
And this was before the forest.
That's correct. Built. Yeah, we did it right away.
And it was limestone, so it still was going to take a while to react. But and I don't mean any disrespect to Eric. Eric is now, no. I'm not even sure if Eric is still in the business, but last I ran into Eric, he was in Phoenix. And
that's correct.
And it was interesting because, I hope if Eric happens to listen, he takes this with great stride and great respect. But, he just wouldn't buy on the whole idea of putting limestone down. And I thought he was just this of course, we were in that middle of the base saturation wars and all that stuff. But interestingly enough, many years later, I ran into Eric in Phoenix, and he had become a Neil Kinsey fan, and he was a big believer at that point. And I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the work that you and I were doing, or that we ended up kind of convincing him to do. But yeah, that place, that soil of, and this is quite honestly true of that entire belt across New Jersey, and it kind of rolls down into central Maryland and into northern Virginia. It's a high mag, low calcium soil. Yeah. And it's relatively easy to adjust with limestone. Again, conventional wisdom, is probably not on our side. This is what got me fired from Rutgers, and the whole base saturation wars. But this is the classic base saturation model: is if calcium and magnesium are off, and you can bring calcium up. We drove out the magnesium. We brought the calcium up with high cal lime, and the changes that you guys. This is the first experience I ever saw of this was with you and your property, and then of course the forest.
So before we made those lime applications in the 545, the place was so prone to getting clover. It was unbelievable.
Yes, that's right. I tell that story too.
We could make 2 treatments a year with dicamba and still have clover.
Yeah.
And it was persistent. And when it happened really rapidly, but when we began to make these corrections, all of a sudden we didn't have this lime issue. And in time, I would say in a few years, you could control all the weeds on 54 holes of golf with a gallon hand tank sprayer. Yeah. That's no exaggeration. That's what occurred. And, listening to Jerry, the one thing, everything he told us would happen, happened. He really steered us. Even though he was cranky about it, he did a great job of
he yelled at you
addressing the
often,
issue.
Didn't he?
He did. He never held back.
He never held back. You know, it's funny because you and I are about the same age, and you know, I knew nothing, quite honestly, Tom, when you and I started working together, and Jerry was telling you and I the same thing, and I just like, oh God, I hope this is true. And it all came to fruition, and this was the very first experience that I had with any of this, and it was all, you know, it was all with you and at Fiddler's Elbow. I mean, that story of Clover, I tell that story all the time. I was amazed by that.
You know what else occurred, Joel? And it happened, I think, in the first year. We made the dormant application probably after Thanksgiving, something like that. But the following spring, it greened up. And that golf course, the soil stayed cold, and everything, all the properties around us were greening up. That place stayed like fairly dormant, you know, until about May when it got hot. And when we began these applications, it did green up in the spring for like the first time.
Yeah, that was another lesson I learned. I mean, we were told early on that, you know, we talk of biological soil management. That's really what we're talking about. And we were always told that from academia that, if you're going to be dealing on microbial levels, it's not going to, green up until June. And you were greening up before the leaves were coming out.
That's correct.
And you were actually staying greener through dormancy. You were going into dormancy later and coming out of it earlier because you had, microbial activity is going to warm up a cold soil. And
that's correct.
We learned that. I learned that at Fiddler's Elbow with you. I mean,
Jerry knew it. You didn't know it. I didn't know it, but Jerry knew it.
Yeah, you and I needed to be proven. I mean, I'm like, God, I hope he's right. I hope, but there, it's, oh my God, there's just so many things. But when you started working on that upper course, the forest course, and we saw that incredibly sticky soil, that drove home the whole calcium base saturation thing. And that's the simplicity of what base saturation is. It's not always going to work. It works on heavy CEC soils, but it sure worked on your property.
That calcium was so deficient that I would make applications with a fairway sprayer of calcium, of liquid calcium products. It was like painting behind the sprayer. The green up was instant. Yeah, because it was so starved for calcium. It was remarkable, the response. Yeah. I mean, we got a response from everything because nothing was happening.
Right, exactly. It was just, it was a dead soil. I mean, think about it. It was pretty much a dead, well, with the level of magnesium that you guys had and the lack of calcium, the soil was so tight. I remember trying to pull probes and having a hard time getting a probe into that soil.
Eric had a bare spot in front of number 18 in the fairway. He and I went out there with an aerator. We aerated it twice. We seeded it. We turned on the irrigation, came back, and the holes all closed up. They did. I mean, immediately. It was amazing. It was amazing.
That is good.
I think the numbers, Joel, were something like calcium was around 50 and the magnesium was like 24 or something.
I thought it was higher than that, actually, the magnesium. But
somewhere around
it was
there.
high. It was very high. But I'll tell you, the thing that was most impressed with, that really stuck in my head was the physical structure of it. I mean, you could roll that in your hand and make a rock within a minute. I mean, it was, and it stuck to your shoes. And again, this is, like you keep saying, Jerry told me that one day, and I said, yeah, it's incredibly sticky. He goes, yeah, it's high in magnesium. And I'm like, how do you know that? Well, because it's sticking to your shoes. That's magnesium. Oh, okay. It's just, it's kind of funny because like I said, I talked to Glenn Smickley on this podcast. I talked to John Chassard, both of which knew Jerry fairly well, but nobody knew him better than you.
So we should talk about how you were introduced to Glenn Smickley.
Oh, you remember that? I was going to ask you.
I remember. You spent all your savings to go to a conference. You stayed in a crap hotel. I remember that. And rented a room and did a breakfast.
Yeah, that was
sent out a lot of invitations.
That was in Dallas. I think I told that story when I interviewed Glenn, but that was you. So that was in Dallas at the National for the Golf Course trade show. And you're right. This was early '90s because Glenn and I started working right as RTK opened up. But I invited a ton of people. and you know, some pretty good names. I invited Paul Latchaw, I invited Dean Graves, I invited a lot of people, and you and I, you kind of encouraged me to set this up. I had gone to the hotel, rented a room, had this beautiful spread of breakfast stuff, and had a whole plan, you know, had a whole talks planned and all this stuff, and you know, 8 o'clock and 8:15 nobody, 8:20 nobody, and then one guy walks in, and it's Glenn Smickley, and I didn't even really know Glenn at the time, and he was the only guy that showed up that whole day, and you and he spoke for quite a while. I don't even know if I said more than 5 words to him. You talked to him, and as I said, when Glenn and I talked on the podcast, that basically started our career beyond Fiddler's Elbow. So my accountant was very happy in the following year, because you were no longer my sole client and my entire livelihood at that time. You know, the other story that's very similar, and I hate to drop names, but I'm going to do that in this case because it was such a striking story to me, was one day, and I don't, you weren't with us, but Jerry and I had gone up to a trade show in Westchester County, New York, and we ran into Eric Nelson from Cornell. And he was doing some research and on organics, and we were, you know, 2 kids that, you know, were just starting a little business, and we were able to get him some 5-4-5, and he took it up to his trial, and we did extremely well. So one day, out of the blue, I get a call from a guy that I don't even know who he is. And I come over to you, and I tell you about this call that I get, and I said, hey, I got a call from this guy. I think his name is Paul Latchaw. And your response was, Paul Latchaw called you? And I'm like, yeah, why? What happened? Is he like, Paul Latchaw called you? And I'm like, yeah, he called me. You know, I told him a story, and the story is that somebody had called Paul. Paul was now at Wilmington. This was prior to him going to Congressional. Just after leaving Augusta. And Paul had gotten a call from some salesman trying to sell him on some organic fertilizer. And Paul, being the, the facts and figures guy that he was, and obviously a man who I have tremendous respect for, and helped us tremendously. But he said, well, do you have research on this? And he goes, oh yeah, we got plenty of research. This is the salesman that was talking to him. And he goes, and Paul asked him, he says, well, did Eric Nelson do any work? Oh yeah, everybody knows us. We're blah, blah, blah. So Paul called Eric, and he said, hey, do you know this guy called me about this organic? And he goes, no, I never heard of this. But there's these 2 guys in Pennsylvania that have this product, and I tested it, and it's really, really good. You should call him. So he calls me out of the blue. I have no idea who he is, and I ask you about it, and you inform me of Paul's career background and the importance of Paul in this industry. And I had no idea. I had no idea who the man was at the time.
And the other connection was the general manager at Fiddler's Elbow, Dave McGee, who was a former superintendent, actually went to Penn State with Paul.
Yeah.
So they went back a long ways. And I think that Dave's name gave us a little bit of credibility as well.
Yeah. And Dave,
there's no doubt.
Dave was wonderful to us, and I am always, and I will always be grateful. And I hope he is doing well in retirement. But I always love talking to Dave. He's so down to earth and so easygoing. Yeah. And again, he helped 2 kids from Martins Creek kind of get things going. But that was, that kind of started, between talking to Paul and talking to Glenn, and all of it really kind of stemming from what you and I did. And all that kind of stuff. Tell me, you have some great Jerry stories, and we, you knew Jerry probably better than anybody in the golf course industry, and as you know, Jerry was not a huge fan of the golf course industry.
Oh my goodness, no. The first year we were working together, he asked me how I was doing. I said, we're doing great. He goes, I can't imagine how you're putting all that poison out. We had made an application of pre-emergent herbicide. I go, Jerry, I would love to not have to do this, but it's necessary.
It's the business, Jerry. Yeah.
He couldn't get his head around that.
Yeah. I mean, he was a traditionalist, and God bless him. I mean, he gave us that whole side. I don't know that he ever really enjoyed the golf side, and it wasn't long that, he and I decided that, maybe we keep you in the background and let me be the talking head, and you just, feed me the information that we need. And it wasn't long. I think you were telling me earlier the story of him at Valley Forge at one of the trade shows, which was a great story.
Somebody took a picture of him from a distance.
Yeah.
And he was so miserable.
Yeah.
You took a look at that picture after the conference and said, you know what? Jerry can't do any more of these trade shows. He hated talking to landscapers. He hated it.
And golf course and anybody. Yeah. Anybody that was, Jerry we've done a couple podcasts with Jerry's, video, his some of his lectures that were recorded. But if you knew Jerry, he was truly a traditionalist. I mean, his business was sustainable agriculture. So,
yes,
his whole mission was to go away from chemical fertilizers, chemicals, chemical treatments. And we knew that we weren't going to do that in the golf industry, which is why I came on. And we worked pretty diligently to kind of help people find ways to do, reduce. But there's not a golf course in the country that's organic. I mean, I'm never going to try to say that, but we are making some, huge strides. And you say this all the time. I can't tell you how many companies have come and gone in the 30 years that I've known you that have basically tried to outposition us. And it's just a constant struggle. And I think the reason is because what Jerry taught us was it's a holistic approach to balancing chemistry and doing all the biological piece, the feeding of the soil. And, and it's made a big reduction in the use of some of these chemicals, but nobody's going to say that, we're going to completely eliminate chemical inputs.
But I think when you were doing work with Eric Nelson, he actually saw significant disease reduction.
He did.
In his
dollar
test
spot in
plots. I mean, we couldn't say that,
No, I know.
You can't say a fertilizer is controlling a pathogen, but I know it was making a difference. You know what? Interestingly, Fiddler's Elbow had virtually no dollar spot.
Yeah.
I think I had it, like before I left, we had it on one fairway. That was it on the whole property on several hundred acres,
Yeah. Well, like my accountant says, you supported us for many years. So you actually in those beginning years, you used an awful lot, but it also showed us that the importance of that upfront investment. You guys were really, you in particular, were really good at understanding that I need to get this jump started. And then here's another great Tom Breiner story. I tell this one all the time. When we first started working, I would have a traditional 4 application, program. I didn't know any better. We didn't know what this stuff was really going to do. So, I'm living on unemployment. I'm on a very tight budget. And we've done 1 application, 2 applications. And I come to you and say, hey, Tom, it's time for that 3rd application. And you said to me, oh, I don't need it. I'm like, of course you need it. It's on this piece of paper. I got bills to pay, and I'm panicking. And you get me you calm me down, get me in the cart, and we drive around. I'm looking around. I'm like, wow, you really don't need it. I mean, who would have thunk? I didn't know that. I didn't have any idea.
You know what, Joel? It happened rapidly too. Jerry had us, at a high rate with 545 out of the
limestone.
And limestone as a dormant feed. We did those applications up against winter, and we had such great results from just doing that alone. We ended up running those fairways after that initial load somewhere between, I know that Jerry used to bitch about, like, get your head away from nitrogen all the time, enough with the nitrogen talk. But for our industry, it kind of makes a difference that we were running those fairways somewhere between 1 pound of N per year and 1.5 pounds of N per year for, whatever that was, from 90 to, I left in 2011. So, 20 years of it.
Yeah.
And with phenomenal conditions in those fairways.
Yeah.
I mean, we had some healthy turf. In spite of growing it, in some places, we were growing that in straight shale.
Yeah, you had some incredibly lousy soils there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was really unbelievable. But again, this was a lesson that I didn't know. I had no idea. I mean, I'd come out of Penn State. I'd been an accounting extension agent. I wrote down, when we first started working, a 4-step program like everybody taught us, 4 applications throughout the season, shoulders, winter and summer. And we quickly got to a point where you didn't need it. And I'm
No.
panicked. I'm absolutely panicked because I had
Yeah.
bills to pay, and I I needed to eat and things like this. But
You
then
were listening to the lawn care
Exactly.
people with the
Yeah.
4-step program.
Well, that's the industry was built on this ChemLawn model, which was
It
4
was.
applications of urea.
Yeah.
That's all we knew. That's what we were taught in college. That's what we were taught as extension agents. I mean, and that's what we all knew. So I didn't know that it was going to be radically. I mean, again, I'm coming into this thing with great passion and a complete commitment to Jerry's model, but I really hadn't seen it, and I really didn't know. And I was a wide-eyed kid and didn't know much about anything. And the things that we learned in those years, the limestone and the when carbon starts to kick in, it runs for well. I tell this story, and I'm sure I embellish this, but I remember, and I'm going to let you really kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but I tell the story of when the recession hit in 2008, and they basically came to you and said, nothing. And
well, where can you save money? Where can you cut back?
and
Sure,
and,
no
and
doubt.
I mean, I'm sure I've embellished this, and I will be the first to admit that, but my memory of that year was you didn't put out anything and got through pretty well. I mean, this is now after 10 years, 15 years maybe of constant applications and building up soils and getting them balanced. We did a lot of soil testing in those days, but you made it through a very, 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 very bad economic stretch. I mean, it wasn't your best year, but you didn't put a lot of inputs in.
The other thing, just for perspective, is that Fiddler's Elbow was not an equity club. It was a for-profit operation.
Yeah.
I mean, we always managed cost. I never felt as though I was extravagant in any way other than freaking earthworks stuff.
Well, but when you start cutting back your costs, I mean, you literally, I mean, I probably still have the counting and the books back in the basement somewhere, but you literally started to really drop in, because at that time we were selling to you directly. We didn't have a distributor, so we knew exactly what you were purchasing and at what cost. Your numbers were falling consistently with us, which was, once we realized that this is really what the model is supposed to be, it was like, we started playing the game of how low can we go? I mean, can we get this even lower? And then in 2008, when that recession hit, you basically didn't bring anything in. I mean, I think we gave you a couple bags of stuff. So
in the beginning, you had 545, but the second product you had was Kick.
Yeah. Those were the first 2 products that we built.
And that product, again, was absolutely remarkable. What we did.
It still is, actually.
I mean, it is. It's a
humic acid product.
It was. And it had so many, it was a rich product, had a lot going on in there. Sugars
it kicked a lot of stuff out. You'll actually.
But I remember you just saying, "What are we going to call this stuff?" You had no idea what you were going to name it.
That was walking. When we named it, we were walking into Rich DeFebo's office. That was our first sales call, and we had 545 was easy because it's an analysis. But we had a liquid that was a humic acid based product, and we didn't have a name for it. We literally were at the front door of his office, coming in to kind of get into the business with Rich, and we named it at the door, and we walked in. It's going to be called Kick. Why? I don't know. I think he kicked the door open or something happened, but it's still one of our leading products, which is.
See, now the other thing I'd like to say about Jerry is that he was a great educator. He really was.
Yeah.
The guy took the time. I remember you guys got me a subscription to Acres USA.
Yeah.
And I started really getting into it, And I also was having some health issues at the time. And Jerry, we would sit there in that office in Martins Creek and just yak about nutritional issues for human beings. He knew a lot about that world. The other story that we did not talk about, but Jerry had found a guy with some microbial material that you called jungle greens.
Yes. That
was so remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff, it was a shame that it wasn't a product that
could survive. Yeah.
That that was, you know, commercially viable because it was difficult to source. But I remember that stuff. You know, everybody says you can't get rid of thatch. We got rid of thatch.
You know, it's funny you say that. I don't play golf very often, but one of my friends got a round for us at the local golf course here, Copper Hill in Flemington, New Jersey. And I think you will remember the story, but Jungle Greens was an inoculated product that came out of the reason it was called Jungle Greens was
Amazon.
It came out of the Amazon. There was a doctor that was spent his career down in the Amazon studying the microbial populations and brought some of them back. And really what they were using it for was cleaning out grease traps at restaurants, and it worked phenomenally. And so we put it into a combination of, you know, compost and some other things. And, you know, again, over a bottle of bourbon, named it, you know, Jungle Greens. We also had a product, we'll talk about this in a minute, called Desert Greens, and which was straight kelp. But the Jungle Greens was this inoculant with this compost kind of material. It's very similar to our current Renovate, but without the inoculant. But I remember, and I can't remember the gentleman's name who was the super at Copper.
He had a nickname, you know, like
Wayne somebody,
like Jungle Fred or something.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. But we gave him a bag, and he put it on that putting green that, if you remember Copper Hill. We put it
Wayne at Copper Hill.
Wayne at Copper Hill put it on.
I can't
his
remember his
green.
last name. Yeah.
So we got a call. It's another one of these calls. We get a call from Wayne and says, "Hey, you got to come out here. I think I have copper spot on my putting green." And I'm like, I don't even know what copper spot is. You know, and there's no Google at that time. This is early 90s, right? So I'm like, Jerry, do you know what copper spot is? No, I never heard of it. What's copper spot? So we get out there, and Wayne had looked at this putting green that he had applied Jungle Greens on, and there was like little things changing. And Jerry and I are standing on it, and he realized, oh my gosh, this is the Jungle Greens devouring whatever he's been putting in this. You know, he was a very conventional superintendent.
Yes.
So there was stuff locked up in that putting green for probably 20 years. And, you know, his theory was, right or wrong, was that it was kind of eating up whatever was there. And it was kind of like, you know, like releasing things. And we're like, oh my God, what if this thing like takes, like, maybe we shouldn't even be standing on it. We might just be devoured. And it was a little nerve wracking. It ended up being fun.
Rick Kroc said that it ate his shoes
Yes,
when he sprayed it. No, he said it for real. He said it ate the leather on his shoes. We were kind of out of our minds, you know.
Yeah, a little bit, weren't we? Yeah, I don't. Maybe it was good that the product didn't last, because it was. Although you're right. I mean, and that was really where we first started understanding, you know, this whole biological digestion process.
Yes.
And thatch. And you guys, you know, you had some thatch. I mean, a lot of the clients and many of our early clients were people that you referred us to, like Wayne and Tim. But I remember, you know, going through the whole thatch digestion of just simply slowing down the synthetic nitrogen and bringing up the carbon base, and thatch was starting to go away. And Fiddlers was, you know, the first place we saw that too. I mean, you were my training ground, man.
We had
everything.
We had one golf course that had not. We had 9 holes that had not been on the same maintenance regimen as the rest of the place for a long time, and that was where the entrance is, what used to be called the Red Golf Course. And that had thatch like nobody's business. And fairy ring.
Yeah. Oh,
gigantic fairy ring that was, I don't know, I can't remember, type 2, the stuff that actually kills.
Yeah, you had mushrooms and death and all sorts
of
things.
And between cultivation and biological soil management, that went away.
Yeah.
It really did.
And that's another great
problems
story
that we addressed. We did address a lot of things.
Early 90s, when we were starting to get some notoriety, and our business was growing fairly nicely. I mean, we weren't big. We're still not big, but I remember vividly, it was about that time, early mid 90s, when fairy ring was really becoming prevalent. And all the professors were coming out and saying, well, fairy ring is all about buried organic matter. I don't know why you would ever put any organic fertilizer down. All you're going to do is get fairy ring. So everybody at that time just stopped putting down what we were doing, because they were afraid they was going to give them fairy ring. And luckily, I had a little experience with you, but more importantly, at that time, the California styled greens were being put into place, and there was no organic matter at all. And they had the worst fairy ring you'd ever seen.
With no organic matter.
Yeah, with no organic matter at all. And now, fortunately, Dr. Mike Fidanza at Penn State has done a lot of research on fairy ring. In fact, has brought a lot of our stuff into his trial. And he's realized and discovered in his research that it's really not a matter of organic matter. It's a matter of drought. And it follows a droughty year. And I remember a story of a course not far from where you were, and he was of the nature of you're causing me fairy ring. So we go out there and we drive around, and he has these big fairy rings. But I realized, the fairways, the inside of the fairy rings, there was no fairy ring at all. And so I started pulling back the onion, and I said, where did you apply this? He goes, well, we did all the fairways. Well, there is no fairy ring in your fairway. It's all in your rough. And he wasn't making the connection. He just immediately saw fairy ring and assumed organic fertilizer. Where he had applied it, the fairy ring wasn't, because part of biological soil management and digesting of ligneous material, you're building humus and it holds moisture. Fairy ring kind of goes away, and that was that was kind of what we were seeing at that time. But we didn't know anything about that either. I mean, all of these things that we were kind of discovering now are becoming commonplace in our industry, and a lot of them started with Tom Breiner at Fiddler's Elbow, and I don't know that even Jerry knew fairy ring issues at that time. I think it was all discovery on our part. It was, but Jerry had an innate ability to grasp very difficult quickly concepts. Yeah, he really did. He was. He really was. I mean, you said this about Jerry. He was incredibly patient. He was. And as an instructor, I mean, most of the time. Yeah, exactly. Well, he was Italian, so he had his boiling points. He had his boiling points. But but his patience was overwhelming. I mean, I came in I was dumb as a rock, quite honestly, when I started doing what we're doing, and he just took me. I had to be de-educated because I had a Penn State education. Correct. I was a county agent. I had NPK in my head. I believed in what he was saying. I loved the concept. I just had never seen it until you and I kind of started discovering these things together. But his patience of taking people under his wing, I wish I had an ounce of that. I mean, I know. This is why I have no friends, because I don't have that level of patience. But he did have a boiling point, and I know he yelled at you often. But because he loved you. He loved you so much, and he felt you were part of the family, I called him one time because I had a boxer that my dog was getting older and it had some health problems. And that was Jerry's other business. I mean, he formulated feed for pets and animals. Pets, herds, mostly actually. Animals, yeah, mostly agriculture. Yeah. So I called him about my dog. He goes, you know what the problem is? I go, what? He goes, you're feeding that dog too damn much grain. He goes, dogs were never meant to eat that grain, which is now a big trend. Yes. All the dog food, for a while. Yeah. But at the time, I was feeding him some kind of commercial dog food. Yeah. You got to start feeding that dog. You go cook for that dog. Get him some organ meat. Like, he really laid into me. And I was on the phone like this. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I went, okay, all right, I'll do that. I remember I would call you. Actually, there's a great story that's really close to that, and I think I shared it with you the other day. There's a movie out right now, and I'm going to forget the name of it, something about soil, that's on Netflix, that I would encourage everybody to watch. And I'm going to forget the name of it, unfortunately, but it's hosted by Woody Harrelson, and it talks about how carbon in soils, if we can regenerate carbon within the soil, we can actually sequester CO2. But there's a great story of Jerry in Hawaii. And Jerry would go to Hawaii with a friend who had an organic ginger farm. And the story basically goes, he's on a nude beach, a naked beach in Hawaii, and with, it's a naked beach, so everybody's naked. And this dog comes up to him, and this dog is mangy and miserable, and, same issues that you were fighting. And so he's petting this dog and, looking at the dog and doing his Jerry thing, which is like, trying to, see if there's anything that he could do. The owner comes up, and the owner, and they start talking, and he says, yells at him the same way he yelled at you. You got to take care of this dog, and and it's two naked men talking to each other on the beach in Hawaii. And it turns out that the naked man was Woody Harrelson. And so he and Woody become friends, and he sends Woody some stuff to take care of his dog, and he took care of Woody Harrelson's dog. Woody happened to be at, I think, Willie Nelson's place down in Hawaii, right up the beach, and I just found out the other day there's actually photographic evidence of that, which I immediately said I really don't want to see that. But he was very passionate about that. He built a pet line in his later career, and I used to use it. I think you used to use it.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly, it would turn the dog's coats, glistering. I mean, it was just brilliant. Tell the story. One of my favorite.
Joel, before you move on, the name of that movie on Netflix is called Kiss the Ground.
Kiss the Ground. Yes. I would encourage everybody to see that. I have yet to see it, but there's a gentleman by the name of Ray Archuleta, who is I think he's USDA or something. I've seen him speak a number of times. Fascinating guy, brilliant man. We, obviously we're biased, but we're all convinced that if Jerry had still been with us, he would have been a part of this production because of the work that he's done internationally with soils. And he knew Ray very well, and it's just a fascinating piece of work, and I would encourage everybody to see it. But yeah, thank you for pulling that up. Tell the story. One of my favorite stories, we talked about this yesterday, was the Kelp Meal story.
So when you guys were getting going and trying to get a little educated about golf courses, I took you to the back of our warehouse area where we stored all our fertilizer. And we had a wide variety of stuff. And we were going product by product and talking about it and why it was here and how did we use it. And then we came to a Kelp Meal product that just had I'm not going to name the manufacturer, but a different name. It was a widely used product, particularly on new grow-ins. And Jerry looked at it. He opened the bag. He stuck his nose in it and smelled it. Then he reached in the bag and took a handful of it and started eating it. He put it into his mouth and he tasted. He goes, "That's Kelp Meal." I go, "Okay, it's Kelp Meal." He said, "We can get you that." You guys used to sell that to me.
Desert Greens.
Yes.
That was the sister product of Jungle Greens. So I mean,
when I was getting it, it was in plain brown bags.
Yeah,
with no label.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we blended it with it, so it was part of our blending materials. It was in a lot of our products, and it's a very expensive product, but it's the closest thing to humus in a bag that you're going to find. But the story is actually. The story was, I mean, when I tell the story, and I won't get into great detail, but you guys had a relatively derogatory name for the product because it had such a strong odor. And I remember, seeing this bag, and I said, I don't know what this is, but Jerry will know, and he'll be here next week. And so he does this, shakes it in his hand, and he eats it. And there's like 5 guys behind us, the 3 of us and 5 of your crew guys behind him, and they're all like jaws dropping. They just ate that disgusting named product. And from that point on, he was a hero. He was a hero. But it was actually pretty funny because Jerry would eat everything. I mean, to a point where he would taste things just to know. And
Jerry actually was utilizing that in cattle feed as well.
It's a big amendment in cattle feed because it's such a digestible source. And the other thing about Kelp Meal is that that everybody needs to understand is that Kelp Meal, both liquid and granular, there's over 60 trace elements in there. And some are pretty powerful, but it is an incredibly I do a pyramid in a lot of my talks, the carbon pyramid, and you'd have short chain, medium chain, long chain carbons. Kelp is a very short chain carbon. It's very digestible, especially in a granular form. So when we would use it as that, jump start for new construction. It's in Renovate, and we used to use it straight up, but it's such a powerful product, and it's it's misused a lot of times. A lot of products that are on the market, and this from the work you're doing now, a lot of companies claim Kelp Meal, but if all you have to do is look at the price of the product, if it's a really low priced product, there's a spin of Kelp Meal in it, because Kelp Meal, unfortunately, is an expensive raw material. It's such a powerful one. And, one of the things that I still curse at Jerry about this day is when, he helped Earthworks set pricing. And unfortunately, we didn't learn the value of turf pricing. We learned the value of ag pricing. So our margins aren't what a lot of people, but we use very rich products like Kelp Meal
Very much so.
and rock minerals and things like that. And, and
so, Joel, we, over the years, we always kept a pallet of that on the shelf. And when we would have isolated dry spots, particularly in fairways, we didn't go out with wetting agent. We would give one of the crew guys, here's a bag of this stuff, here's your spreader setting, go hit all the dry spots.
The Kelp Meal.
And it would correct them. Yeah. So we use that product a lot. Not when the greens were pretty much straightened out, the fairways were straightened out, we had backed off of that as well. However, it was a great tool for managing isolated dry spots.
Yeah.
It made such a difference. What's the CEC on that stuff, Joel? Something
it's fairly high.
astronomical.
There's a lot of, it's a lot of holding capacity on that.
Yeah.
Well, Kelp Meal itself isn't as high as some of the other things we use, like Ecolite, Z-Lite.
Right, correct.
But the Renovate is, has that. But, I'm going to have to edit this out because I have a lot of friends in the wedding agent industry. So.
Well, I know.
But
you
it's
know
true.
what? And I'm not disparaging wedding
kidding.
agents. I sell wedding agents as well. And they certainly have a place. I'm not disparaging them at all. I would suggest that people use wedding agents, but for a longer, more permanent solution to some of these issues, Kelp Meal is a great tool.
Yeah,
that's
anything you can do to the soil that's going to change the biological environment, and Kelp Meal will do it probably quicker than anything if you could afford a lot of it. Unfortunately, it continues to go.
I just thought of another funny story.
Oh, good.
That nobody. We had just started working with your products, and it was great because they were so safe. You could toss them around anywhere, any time of year. I wasn't worrying about it.
Never burned.
And one Friday, I decided to, by myself, fertilize the back lawn by the clubhouse.
Oh, great.
So I fertilized this whole thing with 545, and it had an aroma. I never seem to mind it, but that's me. And I stayed late in the day, and I looked up, and there was a wedding that afternoon on the back patio. Nobody said a word, but I'm thinking, oh my God, this poor bride is standing out here after, I'm talking hours between making the application.
Did you water it in? No, just sitting there. Oh my gosh. It's so funny.
I wasn't paying attention. Later on, I learned I paid attention to the schedule, from the club put out every day. But at that point, I wasn't.
Yeah, there's a wedding coming. Stay away from earthworks.
Nobody said a word. I don't know.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Yes. Luckily, she was a farmer and she grew up.
Maybe
Let's hope. Let's hope. Another great story that I love, and again, you just pulled me out of a fire with this one, and you'll remember this. We had an issue at one point in the mid-90s with some of the 545 getting spiked at the plant.
Other way around, I think. Other way around. You tried to make a 1425.
No, this was 545. It was. Let me tell you.
Okay,
all right. This was the 545, and what happened was the people at the plant messed it up and spiked it. So we had guys going out with 545 in July, thinking it's safe, like you were just saying. When you said safe, it reminded me of this. And I'm actually, I had just gotten married. I think I'm on the only vacation I think I've had in my entire professional career. I was scuba diving down in Costa Rica, and Correct. I'm getting phone calls from distributors and superintendents saying you're burning up places, and you got to get your butt back here. And the world is coming to an end, and it changed my life, unfortunately. So I had finally gotten home, and I'd gotten back, and I was tracking where all this stuff when I realized that you had gotten some of this stuff, and I called you and I said, Tom, don't put this stuff out. It's spiked. It's blah blah blah. We hadn't even run the analysis. So then we finally ran the analysis, and it was a 10.25. And so you took it and you put it out, and you go, hey,
no, that's Joel, that's not accurate.
All right, well, you tell me the story. That's my memory.
The story is you were making a bridge product. Oh, well, so there are two separate stories that you're conflating.
I think there are two separate stories. But yeah.
You had an issue with people being pissed about greens. However, the story about the very excellent results came from you making a 1425, and at the plant, you in production, about 4% of that 1425 had flashed off.
Oh,
It was
that
lost
was
in the
that was a
lost
different
in-
story, but yes, you're
Yes,
right. I
but
remember
that was the fertilizer
Wow.
that I called you about. I put it on teas, and it was another one of those calls. You got to get out here.
Yeah, thanks.
And the feed on that product was so remarkable.
Yeah.
It was the greatest tea. I mean, it was like
Now that
teas
you
that
know
will
what
tea-
it is, and that once you've realized
And-
what you were dealing with.
And it was so successful that you started manufacturing it.
Yeah. You know,
I mean,
it's-
that was a
it's-
great, yeah.
It's funny how, the genesis of a business like this one,
Yeah.
I mean, it happens from a lot of mistakes. I mean, there was a lot of mistakes made in our early years. There's no question. And luckily we didn't put anybody out of business like I was
I
told.
bought them all. I bought all your
Yeah.
mistakes.
I just wrote a
Lisa
note
would
there.
call me. Lisa Kiefer in
Right.
Joel's office.
No,
would
actually,
call me.
it was even worse than that. If you remember, you were getting calls from our plant manager around our back completely. Hey, Tom, look, we got this stuff. It's all boogered up and we can't sell it. And will you take this? Yeah, bring it over. So for probably 5 years, all you ever brought in was the biggest mistakes that and we're all like, oh, thank God we have Tom, because what would we do with a truckload of stuff that we can't sell?
You had made some private label stuff for somebody too one time that didn't work,
Yeah.
that never got off the ground. And that was phenomenal fertilizer,
Yeah,
that you made, but you couldn't sell it.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I don't really have anybody like you anymore. You need to get back into the superintendent world. And
I remember another time, a golf club in Eastern Pennsylvania had stored 545 in a steel building and they had it shoved right up at the top of their pallet racks for an extended period of time. And the heat was not good for the 545. Let's just say that. And it had a very strong ammonia odor, if you recall.
Yeah, it started to cook a little bit, and the ammonia started to go.
It did. And you called me. I said, I'll take it. I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, but we put it out in the rain. It was great. There was no issue with it for me. But then again, I didn't care about. Everybody was killing you about pelletization of your products, and I said, I don't care. They're dusty. So
I got Rick Rock. I'll let Richie do it all. He'll spread anything.
We didn't care.
That's too. It's funny because that was a big battle in those days, was trying to get it drilled, and we've learned so much. I mean, now that we've got partnerships with Rose Acres, and we're literally spending a couple $1 million on a plant to get it prilled. And every once in a while you get that heavy ammonia sound, and that's really just the compost not being completely composted. Our compost usually goes through a 6 month to a year digest before we get used. But if somebody accidentally grabs a fresh pile, every once in a while you still get that ammonia smell. And I'm saying that just as a caution to anybody. But
it was a rare occurrence.
Yeah, rarely.
I don't think we ever had an issue with that with regular product. It was a storage issue on this particular
Well, I remember a couple times some of the liquids back in the day, they weren't as well stabilized. I mean, there were just a lot of things that, and just sitting here talking to you, reminiscing of our early days, I'm like, wow, I survived all this.
So both of Jerry's sons were employed at Fiddler's Elbow. Yuri worked while he was in college, I think for 2 years. And Corey stayed. Corey was there for 15 years, I think.
Corey was a student of mine at Rutgers and sat in the back corner with his hat on, hoping that I would never call on him because he was petrified.
And he was my spray tech for all. Yeah. He was one of the spray techs for a very long time. And he would dread anything that came in an Earthworks jug because there would be some freaking issue. And remember also learning that you needed jugs that had vents in them.
Yeah, we learned that from that experience.
Because the jug
bottles would expand.
Yeah.
Wow, we could write a whole thing. Well, you will be surprised that we just spent an hour on this call. So
Is that right?
yeah, we
Okay.
really have. And again, Tom, I can't thank you enough for your friendship and your support over the years. We will be friends until we're both dead.
Yep.
As our hair is going, and I
Yeah,
love your
check it
beard.
out.
I love the beard. I think it's just great. It's a COVID beard. I think it's
It
wonderful.
is. Yeah.
In all disclosure, Tom has now actually become a salesman and working in the industry, essentially competing with us, which is great. Competition is all good, and but you know, you've been such a good friend and a fair competitor, and that's the way the business should be. I mean, it's great. I mean, you know, and I love seeing you on the circuit, and you know, and I still get calls from guys that you talk to about us, and we share the same stories, and it's just. I mean, that's the way this business always should be. It should work that way. With good people and a lot of friends, and you know, and you know, anybody that knows me or has ever heard me talk has heard your name, and they feel like they know you because I talk about you so much because of all these stories. And we could probably do another hour of these stories. Maybe we'll do that again sometime in the spring.
I just had that happen where my counterpart. The rep in Florida said, "Hey, I just ran into this guy from Earthworks today. He said he knows you. He told me his name. I don't know what your guy in Florida's name is." I go,
"Kirk.
I'd never heard of him."
Yeah.
He said he knew you.
Yeah. I mean, my team knows you very well. You know, I mean, you know Jack, but you probably don't know.
Of course.
And you know Kevin Hicks, obviously, because of his years of experience. But all of our guys, and like I said, probably everybody that's ever been to an Earthworks Academy or sat through a class of me at Rutgers. I mean, every story that I tell, I learned so much from those early years that I had no idea this was all new territory. And look what we've been able to do with it, and look what the industry has been able to do with it because of and I'm not trying to make this an egocentric thing, but we just learned so much, and we were just so hungry for information. I know you devoured Neil Kinsey's book, as did I. You know, I'm now fortunate to work with Bill McKibben, who is our agronomist at Logan, and he's written a great book that's over my my left shoulder here. And you know, it's just been a learning experience, and it's unfortunate with the silly COVID world that we don't get out and have a chance to see each other. But
I know.
Hopefully, when this is all over, you and I can break bread again. And
of course.
And again, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. And maybe we will do this again, because I'll write all the stories, and then I'll go back tonight and say, "Oh, what about this? Oh, there's probably another hour and a half of these same kind of stories." But I want to thank you so much. I know you got a time schedule to meet, but thanks for joining us on the Earthworks podcast. And this podcast is available wherever podcasts are found, as well as on our website at soilfirst.com. And Tom, again, your friendship and your mentoring has been a career builder, and it always touches me that be able to tell people about you and all those stories.
And the one thing I just like to end with is that, you know, I stayed in this industry because it was fun. Yeah. It was fun. We had a lot of fun.
We did have a lot of fun.
And unfortunately, the trends I see is a whole bunch of people that take themselves way too seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, have a little fun once in a while, you know, like lighten up. We're growing grass, you know, we're not fixing the world.
You've said that forever, and it's so true. And if it's a lesson that some of these younger guys can take to heart, it's a great industry with great people. But like we say here at Earthworks, you know, it's only chicken shit or it's only grass. And that's really what, you know, I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, we can do great things together and have great camaraderie, and we do.
Yeah.
And I hope, you know, through the rest of our career, which might not be all that much longer, I hope we can continue that. But I hope everybody that, you know, comes into this industry realizes that it's such a fraternity and such a close knit group of good people that it's a great career. And encourage your brethren, you know, and sisters to join the industry, because we need people now. It's a dying breed. But don't take yourself so bloody seriously.
Exactly.
Thank you again. I appreciate it. As always, we will be in touch, and hopefully we can grab a bite to eat one of these days soon. And like I said, I love the beard. I think I think we'll keep that forever. It'll be great. Around Christmas time, you're going to be a star. You know that.
Exactly.
And you're going to keep growing it, I assume.
I think so.
Good. Tom, thank you so much.
Okay, Joel, take care. Thank you.